Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something darker than usual. A real-life horror story whispered over a crackling two-way radio at 3 a.m. This isn't about ghosts you can see, but the ones you can feel, the ones that anchor you to a place you desperately want to escape. The rain whispers against your window right now. Maybe a power line hums low in the distance, and the air just feels heavy. That's the feeling we're chasing tonight. The moment you realize the world isn't working the way you thought it was. It's the kind of place where, if you hear knocking behind you and you're the only one on shift, just ignore it. It's probably just a misplaced shadow testing the door. So, before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you're brave enough to handle what's coming. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, turn off the lights, maybe keep one candle burning, and let's begin tonight's haunting together. You never wanted this job. Let's start there. You had plans, a shiny degree, a trajectory that pointed toward big city success. But life, that cruel cosmic comedian, threw you off course. A break turned into a year, and that year hardened into 7. 7 years you've spent outside the moving world, watching it go by. So, when the money offered by Shadow Crest, the fading kingdom looked good, too good for a ride operator position. You took it. It was supposed to be temporary, a place to save cash and figure things out. You figured you'd work here a little while and then bounce back. But you didn't. You arrive at the park entrance for your first night shift. The Gothic iron gates, once painted a cheerful royal blue, are now chipped and bleeding rust. The signs advertising the park's biggest rides, the Iron Maiden Wheel and the Crypt Coaster, have flickering neon that make them look less like attractions and more like grim warnings. This place is old, opened during that 80s boom when every regional park tried to be the next Disney. It failed. It feels less like a kingdom and more like a decaying cathedral now. That's your first clue that something is wrong. A man meets you, pale and tired, his eyes betraying years of sleepless nights. He introduces himself simply as the Watcher, which is already a red flag. But the paycheck silences your skepticism. He leads you past the silent teacups and the closed food stalls, and the atmosphere shifts. The air, which was merely humid, now feels thick, like standing at the bottom of a well. The Watcher speaks in a low, conspiratorial murmur, his voice perfect for an unsettling ASMR recording. The contract you signed, he whispers. It's not just a piece of paper, it's binding, in a way I can't quite explain. He pauses, checking over his shoulder at the empty carousel, which seems to shimmer faintly in the dark. Skeptical investigators often study the placebo effect in rituals, but some cultures believe that the physical act of signing a document with intent can bind the soul, a concept that dates back to the myth of Faust. The Watcher says you can't simply quit. The terms are complicated. You brush it off as typical corporate jargon and nervous humor from a guy who's worked too many night shifts. Still, a chill crawls up your spine, that sudden chill, that prickle on the back of your neck. That's going to become your constant companion here. Get used to the uneasy feeling of being watched. Even when the park is completely empty, the watcher leads you away from the cheerful facade of the main square toward a discreet, unmarked metal door tucked behind a churro stand. He pulls out a key card, and the lock makes a dry, mechanical thunk to keep the illusion alive, he murmurs. The guests shouldn't see us dragging trash bags or pushing mops. You step through the door, and the world changes entirely. You enter the sublevel. It's an immediate plunge from cartoonish fantasy into grim, damp reality. Forget colorful lights and cheerful music down here. It's bare, cracked concrete, pipes sweating condensation, and the constant, low-frequency hum of industrial machinery. A hum that vibrates right into your teeth. The air is cold and smells of mildew and ozone. This place is vast, a whole secret city beneath the asphalt smile of Shadow Crest. The sublevel is how employees move around. You can pop down here through one door and emerge minutes later somewhere completely different, keeping the park magic uninterrupted for the daytime guests. The watcher lights the path with a shaky phone flashlight, and the shadows jump and distort the already confusing architecture. You'd think a set of hallways would be straightforward. You'd be wrong. The sublevel, the watcher explains, his voice lower still. It doesn't follow the rules of logic, or physics, for that matter. He points to a door. It's metal like the others, but it's covered in ancient, peeling red paint. That door, he says, supposedly leads to the maintenance bay near the log flume. Half the time, it opens to a brick wall. Other times, a short drop into a garbage chute. He shines the light up, revealing a narrow staircase that ends abruptly, maybe 10 feet up at a blank ceiling. It's like the architecture of a forgotten dream. Researchers still argue whether the phenomenon of déjà vu is a simple glitch in memory recall, or a brief, jarring glimpse into a parallel timeline. Walking through here, you feel a continuous sense of almost recognizing a corner, only to turn it and find something utterly alien. The maps down here don't help. They're faded, water-stained diagrams that bear little resemblance to the current layout. A hallway marked on the map simply isn't there, or a door exists where a wall should be. It's a literal maze that warps itself the moment you look away. It's unsettling enough that your mind starts grasping for simple answers. Faulty design, ancient pipes, poor maintenance, but the way the watcher looks at the ceiling, the way he refuses to touch the crumbling concrete, suggests something far more deliberate. In certain parts of the world, specifically parts of the UK, the concept of a ghost map is an eerie, odd fact, a map of a house or town that only shows things that existed centuries ago, confusing modern inhabitants. This sublevel is a living ghost map. You take your first tentative steps into the sublevel. The oppressive feeling of dislocation already pressing in on you. The Watcher pauses near a junction where three identical hallways converge, his hand gesturing to the plastic lanyard around your neck. The official shadow crest, Employee ID. It's cheap plastic, featuring your photo and name. Welcome to the fading kingdom. Here is your first and most critical rule, the Watcher says, his tone shifting from merely tired to intensely serious. He locks eyes with you, an unnerving, deep seriousness replacing his nervous humor. Always wear your ID when using the sublevel. At first, you think it's a security measure, a way to ensure you're not just a random person wandering the maintenance tunnels. But the Watcher shakes his head. It's more than that. The badge keeps you from getting lost. He admits he has no idea how it works. There's no GPS chip, no blinking light. It's just a piece of laminated plastic, but he insists that when you have the ID on, the sublevel doesn't seem so confusing. The hallways feel shorter. The doors lead where they are supposed to. Those eerie rooms you read about, the ones with a single, inexplicable red chair in the center, you don't find them, at least not nearly as often. He draws a parallel to old folklore. My grandmother used to talk about mischievous spirits that live in the woods, he whispers. They'd turn you around, twist the trails into a maze, make familiar places seem strange. She said the only way to escape was to turn your clothes inside out. You remember hearing similar superstitions as a child, small, domestic rituals against vast, unknown malevolence. This old folklore is similar to the Welsh tradition of the Tylwyth Teg, or fair folk, who were said to steal travelers, and whose tricks could only be foiled by doing something contradictory, like wearing your coat inside out. The sublevel feels like one of those places, a dark playground for something that delights in spatial disorientation. The ID, he theorizes, is your inside-out coat. It's a symbol. It lets the place know you're not a stranger, the Watcher explains. It recognizes you as part of the park. Without it, you're fair game. He tells you to think of your ID as an anchor. It grounds you in the park's strange reality, preventing the shifting walls and staircases that lead to ceilings from taking full, terrifying hold of your perception. He emphasizes that if you lose it, do not go back for it. Go above ground, report it, and wait for a replacement. One odd fact from psychological studies shows that simply holding an object associated with safety or identity can reduce anxiety levels by up to 30%, which some researchers argue is the root of superstitious charms and talismans. But here, the effect feels physical. You nod, sliding the plastic badge under your shirt collar, a gesture that feels more like donning a protective relic than starting a shift. You wonder how a company could legally employ people in a structure that defies three-dimensional space. But then you remember the paycheck. That badge, now warm against your skin, feels less like plastic and more like a necessary second skin. The Watcher tells you why. He wasn't always this careful. He learned the hard way back when he was just a ride operator. "I forgot my ID at home," he recalls, his eyes drifting to a flickering light bulb down the hall. It was before opening. "My shift was at the carousel, but I needed a toolkit from the supply closet in the sublevel." He thought he knew the way. The first hallway was normal. Concrete walls, a few doors, a sign pointing to the nearest exit. He ignored an old, stained map on the wall. He took a left, or maybe it was a right. That's when it started. The hallway stretched. It got longer and longer than it should have, a phenomenon known as the corridor effect, a terrifying state resembling a dream where space elongates unnaturally. Something often reported in cases of sleep paralysis. There were more doors than there should have been, all unmarked, all identical. The supply closet, which should have been right near the entrance, was gone. He started opening random doors, hoping to find his toolkit. Most of them slammed open onto solid brick walls. Then he saw a staircase. Narrow and steep, it spiraled up, disappearing into the dark ceiling. Thinking it might lead to a different surface exit, he started climbing. "It felt like hours," he whispers, but it was probably only a few minutes. The climb was pointless. The stairs didn't end, but simply stopped at a blank ceiling. When he turned back to descend, the staircase had changed. The straight, predictable steps he'd climbed were now a terrifying spiral, twisting down into the light below. As he looked down, he saw landings, entire floors he didn't remember passing on the way up. Some had doors, others just empty hallways. None of them looked familiar. The sublevel had twisted around him, a hungry architectural knot. Panicked, he hurried back, retracing his steps, but the maze had solidified. He kept walking until he finally saw an exit, a simple metal door with a red sign. He pushed through, expecting to be back near the carousel where he started. He wasn't. He was outside, near the entrance to Galactic Frontier, a themed area on the exact opposite side of the park. The iron maiden wheel loomed in the distance. He had entered near the center, yet emerged hundreds of yards away. Skeptical researchers often try to attribute these instances of extreme spatial disorientation to lack of sleep, environmental factors, or a mild form of neurological fugue. But the watcher is convinced. He went home, grabbed his ID, and hasn't forgotten it since. The sublevel, he says, hasn't messed with him since. Not everyone is so lucky, he adds, mentioning a former coworker named Aaron, who went in without his badge and was found 3 days later, curled up by an emergency exit, muttering about doors that opened to nowhere. He barely speaks now. The watcher's story about Aaron lands like a cold weight in the already heavy air of the sublevel. You tug at your badge, a small comfort in the face of impossible architecture. He leads you back up, emerging near the park's main gate, which is locked for the night, though a few lights remain on across the main promenade. The park is open 24 hours, he states flatly, looking at the distant Ferris wheel. At least, that's what the ads say. He clarifies that after sundown, there are no families, no laughing kids, and no tourists. The gates are shut to the public, but the park remains occupied. The people or things that come here after dark, he says, his voice dropping to that ASMR-like whisper again. They aren't like the daytime guests. They aren't human. He looks impossibly weary. I don't know where they come from. All I know is they've been coming here long before I started. And as long as we stick to the rules, they leave us alone. This is the deal. No questions, no curiosity, just adherence to the silent, unspoken contract between the park staff and the things that walk at night. These are the night visitors. You're required to carry a small bag of a specific confection during your shift and keep an extra pack in your locker. This brings you to the second rule, which is as bizarre as the first. The watcher points to a small, waxy bag he pulls from his jacket pocket. The night visitors like sweets, he explains, almost apologetically. Especially this, Rule 2, always carry black licorice. He stresses that it's not for you. You are absolutely not to snack on it. It's an offering, a small, dark token of acknowledgement. He details how to recognize a night visitor, and the description is chillingly specific. Your first clue will be the smell. They smell like old cigarettes, he warns. The second clue is their clothing. Every single one of them wears red. Sometimes it's long like a trench coat, other times short like a jacket. But it's always the same color. The instructions for engagement are simple, clinical, and terrifying. When you sense them nearby, stop. Do not look directly at them. Do not meet their eyes if they have them. Take out a single piece of licorice and offer it with your outstretched hand. Let them take it. Then step aside and resume your duties. Do not watch them walk away. Do not ask where they're going. Just let them be. The legend of the shadow people often involves figures seen only peripherally and wearing dark coats. But the specificity of the red coat and cigarette smell in the night visitors adds an odd, grounded fact to the paranormal phenomena. It makes them feel less like phantoms and more like a grotesque, scheduled security force. You realize this job isn't about running rides. It's about navigating a living, breathing superstition. The bag of black licorice feels surprisingly heavy in your pocket, a necessary ballast against the creeping strangeness of Shadow Crest. The watcher leads you past the silent teacups, which are named the Witch's Brew. They stand still, but the low humming from the sublevel seems to concentrate around them. The night shift has extra rules, the watcher continues, his attention now focused on the towering shape of the park's central feature, the Ferris wheel, the Iron Maiden wheel. It's massive, antique, and looms in the distance like a skeletal clock face. First, a peace offering, he states. He gestures toward the base of the massive wheel, where the thick, riveted supports meet the ground. Rule 3, a variation of the second. Leave 3 candied apples at the base of the Iron Maiden wheel every evening. exceptions. He doesn't know the full history, only the employees' common knowledge, which is laced with dread. They say something bad happened there when the park was being built, he whispers. A construction accident. A worker died on the job. The park was built on a tight budget, and safety gear wasn't a priority. The story goes that a worker, or maybe a few, fell near the foundation. This piece of local history, this something bad, is the official story told by older employees. An unfortunate accident, a man crushed by a beam, a single death. Researchers still argue whether the concept of a residual haunting, a traumatic event imprinted on a location, is real. But folklore across the world suggests that sudden, violent death can tether an unfortunate soul to the place where they died, demanding respect or appeasement. The watcher believes the candied apples are a way to keep things calm, a simple tribute to whatever mark was left on the foundation. He points out a low, almost imperceptible stain on the concrete near the supports. It's a dark rust color, and it seems to absorb the available light. The older workers, he says, they leave the apples without saying a word. You do the same. The idea that you have to perform a nightly ritual to appease a possible casualty of corporate negligence is almost funnier than the black licorice. Until you realize you are now officially part of a paranormal maintenance crew. He walks you around the base of the wheel, and you notice the metal supports, even in the faint light, look inexplicably darker than the rest of the machinery. He turns his attention from the wheel to the park's main pathway. Second night rule, he says, his voice now tight. This is important. If you see a child walking alone after midnight, do not call out to them. You start to ask why, but he cuts you off with a sharp look. I know it sounds cruel, but that's not a real kid. Not anymore. The sight of the dark, stationary iron maiden wheel, and the image of those 3 candied apples resting at its base solidifies the feeling that you've joined a secret society, not an amusement park. The watcher's chilling instruction about the children is your introduction to the next difficult rule. Rule 4. If you see a child walking alone, offer them cotton candy and point them toward the exit. He elaborates on the grim reality of the solitary child. They appear small, pale, and often seem to be trailing something transparent, like a shroud of fog. They look lost, confused, and you will feel an overwhelming, almost painful urge to call out, to offer help, to ask where their parents are. That urge is what you must fight. They used to try to take them back to Lost and Found, he whispers. It never worked. If you approach them, if you call their name, they turn. And when they turn, they don't look like a child anymore. He shivers, despite the park's muggy heat. Your task is to simply carry cotton candy, specifically the blue variety, in your pocket during your patrol. If you encounter the figure, you stop. You hold out the cotton candy. You never make eye contact. You simply gesture with your free hand toward the main exit gates. If they take it, good. If they don't, walk away. Don't look back. There's nothing else you can do. The implication is heavy. These are not missing children. They are perhaps the echoes of children, or something worse, using the form of a vulnerable youth to lure compassionate workers closer. The eerie fact that cotton candy is the prescribed offering adds a surreal, almost ceremonial quality. In some studies of near-death experiences, figures are often described as holding or offering bright, unnatural items to guide a person somewhere. The child is a shepherd, and the cotton candy is the bait. As the watcher speaks, you remember that flicker in the periphery, a small, fast-moving shape you saw darting behind a darkened ticket booth when you first entered the park. You dismissed it as a shadow, a rodent, or your own nervous mind playing tricks. Now you wonder. He pushes you forward, eager to finish the orientation. You need to know how to defend yourself from what he implies is a physical threat. There's one more thing you'll need, he says, leading you to a small, dusty shelf in a back maintenance room. He picks up a thick piece of white chalk, the kind used for playgrounds. Rule 5. Always keep a piece of white chalk in your pocket. If you feel something grab your arm and no one's there, don't panic. Don't try to pull away, and whatever you do, don't turn around. The instructions for this encounter are meticulous and vital. You must stop immediately, pull out the chalk, and draw a circle around yourself on the concrete. The concept of the protective circle is an ancient, real-world horror and paranormal reference, used in ceremonial magic, folklore, and ghost hunting as a barrier against malevolent entities, or to contain summoning. Dating back to medieval grimoires, you must stay inside the circle for an entire hour. The chalk now rests beside the black licorice in your pocket. The weight of these objects, the simple, childish tools, feels absurdly small against the magnitude of the dangers the watcher is describing. The next rule is a chilling confirmation that the night visitors aren't the only threat that requires defense. The watcher tells you his chalk story. It was his first week on the night shift, and he was walking through the sublevel, heading toward an exit near the Candle Cove themed area. Then I felt it, he says, looking down at his forearm, running a finger lightly over a faint discoloration on his skin. Fingers wrapping around my arm. The air immediately smelled like heavy, stale cigarette smoke. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn, to pull away, to fight. But he remembered the rules. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the chalk, and with a hand shaking so violently the line was crooked, he drew the circle on the concrete floor. The second his foot stepped fully inside the circle, the grip on his arm vanished. He stood there for what felt like forever, listening to the echoing silence of the sublevel, the air thick with the smell of old tobacco. He didn't move for an hour, exactly as instructed. He said the silence was the worst part, not a true silence, but the absence of sound that should have been there, the complete nullification of the park's inherent hum. Eventually, the cigarette smell faded, and he knew it was safe to leave. The next morning, his coworkers saw it. On his forearm, there was a deep, hand-shaped bruise. A purple mark perfectly shaped like a 5-fingered grip. Skeptical investigators argue that bruises resulting from psychological or stress-induced incidents are often psychosomatic or self-inflicted during a panic attack. But the consistency of this handprint among different Shadow Crest employees suggests a shared environmental trauma. No one asked what happened. They didn't need to. Everyone at Shadow Crest knows what a hand-shaped bruise means. It's not something we talk about. It's an accepted fact of life here. Now he focuses on the most visible, yet most mysterious element of Shadow Crest, the mascots. These are the bright, cartoonish characters with oversized heads that wave at guests, take pictures, and make kids laugh during the day. Rule 6. Do not talk to the mascots. This rule, the Watcher explains, is one of the few that management actually drills into you during orientation, but they never explain why. They don't tell you what will happen if you do. They just make it clear. Leave them alone. As you work here, you start noticing the things that don't make sense about them. At most theme parks, performers duck into back rooms, swap out suits, take water breaks, or sit for a smoke. Not here, the Watcher says, shaking his head slowly. The mascots at Shadow Crest are just there, always in character, always moving. There's no schedule, no employee names attached to them, no storage areas where they keep the suits, the silence of the mascots, the fact that they never stop, never rest, and never seem to exit the sublevel site adds a deeply unsettling layer to Shadow Crest. You try to picture one of the park's main characters, perhaps the lumbering, grinning bear named Barnaby, the Bonbon Bear, standing motionless in a dark corner of the maintenance tunnels. The Watcher continues his eerie inventory. If you ask management who's inside the costumes, they freeze up, he says. They change the subject or pretend they didn't hear you. But the most disturbing odd fact, the one that makes your stomach turn, is that the suits are never cleaned. In almost every large-scale amusement park, the mascot costumes, due to sweat and wear, are cleaned or aired out nightly. The fact that Shadow Crests are not suggests they either never get dirty, or there is nothing organic inside to necessitate cleaning. You'd think they'd need it, aired out, repaired. But no one ever sees these ones getting maintenance. You can walk through every storage room in the sublevel, check every maintenance closet, and you won't find a single mascot costume hanging up. They simply appear on the park surface in the morning and disappear from it at night. Try as you might, the Watcher challenges you. You'll never catch a mascot taking off their head. You'll never see them sit down to rest or drink a sip of water. If you were to follow one all day, they would simply keep going. The performance is endless. This lack of organic need is where the employee rumors begin. The urban legend is dark, and the Watcher tells it with a solemn reverence that suggests he believes every word. It starts back when the park first opened in the 80s, before the 24/7 operation. One night, a group of 5 teenagers decided to stay after hours. They hid when the park closed, successfully avoiding security. Their plan was to sneak out and have the massive, silent park as their own private playground for the night. They never made it out. The next morning, they were gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Their parents and the police swarmed the park, but nothing turned up. It was like they had just vanished into thin air. Then, just a few days later, the mascots appeared. The park introduced a brand new set of 5 main characters: Barnaby the Bonbon Bear, a grinning sun, a cartoon witch, a pirate, and a cowboy. Management made a big deal out of it. A media event designed to distract from the missing kids. The unsettling coincidence: there were 5 missing teenagers, and the park introduced 5 new mascots. Some people dismiss it as a coincidence. Others say the 5 were somehow stuffed inside the new costumes, their bodies hidden beneath the fabric and foam, forced to perform forever. But the most chilling version, the one the watcher leans toward, is the paranormal reference that whatever happened to those 5 people that night, it changed them. They didn't become performers. They became the characters, entities that never needed to eat or drink or rest. They became the mascots. The thought that those bright, grinning mascots are the transformed echoes of 5 missing teenagers, or worse, the shells containing them, is the most terrifying rumor you've heard yet. It adds a layer of quiet, psychological horror to the park's already sinister atmosphere. That's why the suits don't get washed, the watcher concludes. That's why you'll never catch them taking a break, and that's why you never, ever talk to them. Most of the time, the mascots stick to the main park, moving around the open walkways, doing their unnerving routine. But the watcher warns you that the employees on the night shift see them after hours, wandering through the sublevel, he whispers, standing perfectly still in dark corners, waiting for what? No one knows. You must internalize the rule. If you find yourself alone in the sublevel, and you hear the shuffling footsteps of an oversized shoe behind you, do not turn around. If you're walking down a back hallway and see Barnaby, the Bonbon Bear, standing at the end, his giant head cocked, watching you, keep walking. If you catch a glimpse of one after sundown, standing somewhere they shouldn't be, where no guests are around, just keep moving. The rules are clear. Do not talk to the mascots, especially not at night, and never in the sublevel. The watcher then leads you toward the park's maintenance and administrative offices, steering the conversation toward the final, heavy history of Shadow Crest. It's the story of how the park was built, and it's a grim origin. People come here for fun, he says, gesturing to the deserted park. They don't think about what's beneath their feet. They don't know what's under the bright paint, the clean sidewalks, the towering rides. But we do. He explains that when the park was being built in the 80s, the investors were ruthless. They had a tight deadline and money was pouring in. So they cut every corner possible, Safety gear was cheap, work hours were excessive, and warnings from engineers were ignored. The focus was speed, not safety. Then, on one cold morning, disaster struck. The scaffolding for a major structure collapsed, while workers were pouring concrete for the foundation. Dozens of men fell. Some were crushed by beams, others knocked unconscious. This historical parallel to real-world accidents in rapid construction, especially those involving the hurried pouring of concrete, resonates with the theme of corporate negligence, hiding a dark foundation. But the worst part was the concrete. It kept flowing, thick and heavy, swallowing everything beneath it. The people who could move tried to claw their way out. The ones who couldn't simply disappeared under the wet material. The watcher's voice darkens further as he describes the minutes and hours following the collapse. What should have been an emergency response, ambulances, firefighters, rescue teams, was met with silence. The higher-ups didn't want bad press, he explains, his eyes distant. They didn't want headlines about death and negligence tarnishing their shiny new kingdom. They didn't want reporters asking how a construction site could be so unsafe that over a dozen men were buried alive. So they waited. They sealed off the area and waited. Some say they waited an entire day. By the time they let anyone in to start digging, it was too late. The concrete had hardened. The men who weren't recovered became an involuntary part of the park's foundation. The park denies it. Officially, it's just an urban legend, a ghost story meant to scare new employees. Management says there was an accident, but nothing that bad. No deaths, no cover-up. Skeptical researchers would call this a classic example of apophenia, finding meaning or patterns in random things like cracks in the concrete. But the existence of folklore often points to a buried truth. But if you work here long enough, the watcher insists, you start to feel the truth. Certain areas of the park don't feel right. The iron maiden wheel, especially. That's why the candied apples are left there. The guests avoid the area at night without knowing why. Employees do their closing duties quickly around it. There are other spots, too, mostly in the sublevel. Doors that don't open, and no one remembers what's behind them. Walls that sound hollow when you knock, but with no access point. Maintenance workers report pipes and vents that lead nowhere, sealed off spaces that don't match the blueprints. It's like parts of the park were never finished, or like something was deliberately paved over, covered up. The watcher tells you he's seen it. Sections of the sublevel where the concrete doesn't match, where the walls are just a little too thick, like something was patched over instead of fixed. Maybe the rumors are true, he says. Maybe the bodies are still down there. Maybe that's why the contract exists, and that leads you to the final, most chilling rule, the one that explains why the watcher is giving you this unsettling, personalized orientation. Rule 7, the unwritten one that governs all the others. Never break your employee contract. The contract you signed with with its weirdly specific clauses, doesn't just cover the usual hours, payroll, responsibilities. It makes one thing terrifyingly clear. Once you sign, you're here until the end. You always finish your shift. You never walk out in the middle of a job. You never break contract. The seventh rule, the watcher explains, is the final lock on the cage. People joke about how bizarre the paperwork is, but the consequences are anything but funny. If you break contract, something happens, he states simply, looking down at his hands, which are scarred and calloused from years of work. He's seen it before. New hires who panic, people who don't take the rules seriously, who get spooked by the mascots or the terrifying logic of the sublevel, and decide they can just quit. They think they can just leave. They don't make it far. The watcher recalls a guy who tried to walk out a few years back. He was working the tilte whirl, got rattled by something he wouldn't explain. He just went pale, muttered under his breath, and started running toward the staff exit. He was almost out when he tripped. It looked like nothing, a small crack in the pavement. His foot caught, and he went down hard. The sound his arm made when it hit the ground was wrong. A sharp, wet crack that made everyone around him freeze. The watcher saw him afterward, curled up on the pavement, his face a mask of pain. His forearm was bent the wrong way. They called medical, but they didn't let him go home. Even with his arm mangled, they made him finish his shift. He sat at a booth, his arm in a makeshift sling, handing out park maps and answering basic questions. The contract isn't normal, the watcher stresses. People don't just leave Shadow Crest without something happening. If you break contract, you get hurt. It's always an accident. It's never anything obvious, no mysterious disappearances, no outright violence, just bad luck, freak accidents. Things that could happen to anyone, except they always happen to the ones who try to terminate their contract early. When you sign on to work here, you get a start date and a highly specific end date. The contract isn't forever, but it has to be completed. You can't quit halfway through. You can't walk out in the middle of a shift. No matter what, you finish your time here. The concept that a written agreement can enforce fate is an eerie, odd fact that mirrors the psychological phenomenon known as the nocebo effect, where simply believing something will harm you can manifest physical symptoms or misfortune. The contract seems to weaponize this belief. And when your contract is finally up, then, and only then, you can leave. If you choose to stay, if you renew because the money's too good, that's on you. But once you sign again, you're locked in until the next end date. The fear isn't of the mascots or the sublevel. It's of the pervasive, inescapable bad luck that follows those who try to prematurely escape the contract. The watcher details the subtle, almost mundane tragedies that have befallen former employees. A woman who worked here for 5 years put in her notice and worked her last shift. She was happy, excited for a new job waiting for her across the city. The very next day, she slipped in her driveway and dislocated her knee. Just like that, her new job had to wait months of recovery, and by the time she was walking again, the position had been filled. Another guy left because of the sublevel. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched all the time. He quit, packed up, and moved to a new apartment. A week later, his kitchen caught fire, a gas leak, they said. His apartment didn't burn down completely, but the damage was bad enough that he was unemployed and had to move back in with his parents for almost a year. Some people don't even make it that far, the watcher sighs. A new hire quit after just 2 shifts. Something spooked him, and he didn't show up for his next shift, didn't answer his phone. The next morning, they heard he fell down the stairs in his apartment building. Nothing serious, just a sprained wrist and a few bruises, but enough to put him out of work for a while. It's never a punishment, not exactly, the watcher says, just bad luck. A reminder. The contract doesn't let you go until it's time. It's a terrifying consistency. The type of accident is always just debilitating enough to delay the employee's fresh start, keeping them unemployed or injured until their original contract time has essentially expired naturally. This consistent pattern of misfortune closely resembles a cursed object folklore, where the object, in this case, the contract, does not inflict immediate violence, but subtly alters the environment to create self-destructive chaos for its holder. You ask if anyone has ever successfully gotten out. The watcher shrugs. Some people retire. Some simply stop showing up, and you never hear about them again. Maybe they're fine, he says, with a noticeable lack of conviction. Maybe nothing happened to them, but the ones who are still here, the ones who understand the rules. We don't try to leave, he states. You look at his tired eyes and realize he's talking about a shared, learned helplessness. They're all waiting. The air in the maintenance room, thick with the smell of old oil and concrete, feels suddenly claustrophobic. You clutch the chalk and licorice in your pocket. You realize you are now waiting, too. The weight of the unwritten 7th rule settles over you. You are locked in, and the countdown has begun. The watcher takes a deep breath, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine, unfeigned hope crosses his face. I've got 3 weeks left, he reveals. After 7 long years of endless shifts, the whispering terror of the sublevel, and the strict, silent adherence to the rules, his contract is finally coming to an end. He counted the months, then the weeks, and now he is counting the days. Soon, he will be walking out of the iron gates of Shadow Crest for good, and he has no intention of ever looking back. That's why he stayed as long as he did. The money, it was good. Too good. It's the reason a lot of people stay longer than they should, and the reason they renew their contract. Every time your contract ends, the park offers you more, he explains, detailing the final, seductive trap: a raise, better benefits, a bigger bonus. They make it easy to say yes. That's how they keep you. They don't need chains or security guards. They use the most powerful binding agent known to man: financial temptation. He admits that even now, part of him is tempted. It would be easy. He knows how things work here. He knows the rules. He knows how to keep himself safe. The money is more than he'll ever make anywhere else. Certainly more than his original business degree would have netted him. He could sign another contract, stay a little longer, build up even more savings. But that's how it starts, he whispers, his voice now a low, cautionary hum. A little longer turns into another year, then another, and before you know it, you're one of the employees who never leaves. He means the ones who talk about the rules like they aren't rules at all. Just facts of life, like the way water runs downhill, or how the sun rises. He doesn't want to end up like the husks he sees shuffling around the park. Their identities fully subsumed by the fading kingdom. When his contract is up, he's walking out, and he's not coming back. He's saved enough to start fresh somewhere else, anywhere else. And that final, sweet, terrifying freedom is only 3 weeks away. Researchers still argue whether financial comfort can lead to a kind of Stockholm syndrome, bonding a person to an oppressive but rewarding environment. But the concept of being bought by a curse is an eerie, odd fact that Shadow Crest has fully embraced, but his imminent exit creates a new hole in the park's bizarre staffing needs. Someone has to take his place. The Watcher turns to you, the nervous energy of his impending escape now focused entirely on your pale, fresh face. That's where you come in, he says, his voice losing its ASMR gentleness and gaining a chilling urgency. You signed the contract, didn't you? That's why you're here. That's why I told you all of this. You signed the paperwork. You accepted the unbelievable starting salary. And you are now the Watcher's successor. His orientation isn't a kindness. It's a necessary transfer of dangerous knowledge. He needs you to survive your contract, so the work, whatever it is, continues to be done. He needs you to be ready, because the rules he laid out, the badge, the licorice, the chalk, the apples, the silence, they aren't just stories. They aren't rumors. They keep you safe. They keep you here. You'll see what I mean soon enough, he says, stepping back, creating a physical distance that matches the finality of his words. Don't ask questions. Don't try to make sense of it. Do your job. Your first solo shift starts now. You feel the weight of your lanyard, the strange bulk of the licorice and chalk, the knowledge that a small, pale child might appear, or that a red-coated figure could drift around the corner, or that a smiling mascot is watching you from the shadow of the carousel, is now your reality. The Watcher offers you a final, grim piece of advice, his final act of mentorship. Finish your contract, and when it's time to leave, leave. If you can, he walks you back to the door that leads out of the maintenance area. A simple door you now realize is the portal to your personal prison. He grips your shoulder briefly. I hope my stories helped, rookie. You do well to remember them. He turns and walks away without a goodbye, disappearing down a normal-looking hallway that you know. could suddenly stretch into an eternity. You stand alone for a moment, the hum of the machinery vibrating the concrete beneath your boots, realizing the 7 rules aren't just for safety. They are the 7 steps of your survival ritual within Shadow Crest. You're officially part of the Fading Kingdom. The Watcher has 3 weeks. Your contract has a year, and the night is just beginning. The hum of the sublevel fades. The silence is broken only by the sound of your own steadying breath, slow and deliberate, measured against the 1 hour you might need to stand still in a chalk circle. The tension that coiled around your shoulders throughout the long night begins to loosen, replaced not by true relief, but by a quiet exhaustion. You have made it. The sun is coming up somewhere far beyond the sealed iron gates. You can hear the distant, familiar sounds of the world starting its day. A truck backfiring, a bird calling, the power grid shifting its load. The park is preparing for its daytime guests, the families and children who will ride the coasters and eat the overpriced food, blissfully unaware of the concrete beneath their feet or the figures watching from the periphery. You're tired. Your mind is heavy with impossible architecture and unspoken rules, but you are intact. The badge is still warm against your chest. The licorice is untouched, and you didn't have to use the chalk. You walk toward the exit, your steps light, focused on the idea of a simple, safe bed, holding onto the image of the calendar with your end date circled in red. The night is over. You survived. For tonight, sleep peacefully if you can. You can.